Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Liam Douglas here, and in today's video we're going to be looking at long exposure photography. Now, I've done quite a bit of this type of photography, both daytime and nighttime over the years, and I get occasional emails and DMs about it and how new photographers can get into this, because it can be a lot of fun and you can get some really cool images using long exposure techniques. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, but before we get into all of that, let's go ahead and roll the intro. Okay, so as I mentioned before the intro, today we're going to be talking about long exposure photography. Now, it doesn't matter if you want to do daytime long exposure photography or nighttime. The techniques are pretty much the same. It's just going to be a matter of the gear that you use. There's going to be a slight difference between daytime and nighttime long exposure photography gear-wise. So the first thing that you're going to need is a good sturdy tripod. Now, for my example here, I'm using my Peak Design carbon fiber travel tripod. This is a bit of an expensive tripod, so if you're on a limited budget, there's really nice ones you can get on Amazon from companies like K&F Concepts, and I'll put a link down below in the description so you can check them out for yourself. They do make some really great carbon fiber tripods that are considerably less expensive than the Peak Design travel tripod. And then, of course, the next thing you're going to need is your camera. Now, you're going to have a camera that has the ability to switch to bulb mode. Now, most all cameras have this built in. It's on the dial, generally where you set your shutter speed. You'll look and you'll see that you have a B, which stands for bulb mode. Now, what bulb mode means is when you press the shutter, it's going to stay open for either a preset time limit that you can configure in your camera, or it'll just stay open until you release the trigger. Now, another thing we're going to need in order to do this using bulb mode is you're going to need some sort of remote trigger. Now, for most major camera manufacturers, you can get a physical remote camera controller that'll plug into the port on your camera, and it'll have a short cable to a little remote control you hold in your hand. You can do it that way. You can also use your camera manufacturer's smartphone app, whether you're on iOS or Android, doesn't matter. Most all camera companies offer their app for both platforms, and you can use that as your remote triggering system. If you want to get a little bit fancier, you could use something like a Pluto trigger or the Arsenal 2 trigger. I have both of those. Right now, I've lent them out to another photographer who's trying to decide which between the two he wants to buy. So I'm letting him borrow those right now, so I don't have them right here handy. But basically, your remote trigger would mount in the hot shoe and then still plug into the cameras, same port as the cable controller, the cable release, but you wouldn't have to be physically attached with your phone or a device in your hand. The rest of the device is wireless, so you just pair it with the app on your phone and you can control your camera that way. Now, if you want to do daytime long exposure, you're also going to need a quality ND or neutral density filter. Now, I have one on the front of my Fujifilm. I'm using the 10x24 millimeter lens. You can use any lens you want. It all has to do with what field of view you want to capture in your long exposure photography. I usually use a wide angle lens like this 10-24, or I might use the 35 millimeter or something like that, because I like to get wider shots when I'm doing a long exposure photography. So I've got a Kase Wolverine variable ND filter mounted on the front of this lens. And of course, I recommend you buy your filters in a size, the size of your largest lens element in your lens collection, or go even bigger maybe. Get an 82 millimeter, 95 or 105 or 10 or whatever it is, the maximum size. And then just get a quality set of step-up rings, which is what I did here. My filters are as big as 77 and some of them are 82. So I just put, being this lens, this front element is a 72 millimeter, I just put a step-up ring on the back of the filter to go from 77 to 72, and then bada bing, it's mounted on my camera lens, and I'm good to go as far as that's concerned. Now, you may be wondering, if you're new to photography, why do I need a neutral density filter? Well, you only need it if you're going to do daytime long exposure photography, and the reason for that is, as you can see where I'm out here today, it's super bright and sunny out. And in order to do long exposure photography, you're doing what? long exposures. You might be doing 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 30 seconds, a minute. You can't have all of this bright light coming into your lens and hitting your sensor, or you're going to blow everything out. Every frame is just going to look like white. You're going to have nothing but the color white. You're not going to be able to see anything. So the ND filter cuts down the amount of sunlight that gets into your lens and onto your sensor when you're making the exposure. So if you're on a super bright sunny day, you might want to go with a much stronger ND filter, like a 32 or 64 stop. I think there's even some companies that make 128 stop. I think that might be a little bit overkill, but it depends on what you're going for. So for daytime long exposure, you've got to have an ND filter on your camera, and you'll get a great exposure, because then you can leave your shutter open longer. You can end up with an exposure that's completely balanced, and you can get that long exposure look. Now, you may be asking, well, what exactly does daytime long exposure give me over a standard exposure? Well, if you're somebody like me that likes to travel and likes to explore and check out new places and things, one of the things I love daytime long exposure for is if I'm, let's say, at a beautiful lake or a river, and I want to capture a shot of that body of water, but I want the water to be as smooth as possible, and maybe the day I'm there, there's a decent breeze blowing like there is today. So the water's going to have waves and be choppy. Well, if I put my neutral density filter on my camera, line up my shot, get my exposure set, and then take the photograph, the longer my exposure is, the more that choppy water is going to smooth out. And if you do it for a decent amount of time, 20, 30 seconds, maybe 45 seconds, you're going to end up with an exposure where that water is as smooth as a sheet of glass. And it's a really cool effect. Now, let's say you're photographing waterfalls, something I love to do. I used to love to go to Amicalola Falls when I lived in Georgia. It's a massive, beautiful waterfall up in Dawsonville, Georgia. And if you do long exposure of a waterfall using your ND filter and a 30 or 45 second exposure time, you can make that water that's falling down over the rocks look as smooth as silk. It's a pretty cool effect. And I'm going to share some of my past long exposure photographs in this video so you can check out how cool they look for yourself. Now, let's say you want to do nighttime long exposure. You can do those as well. Now, the nice thing is with nighttime long exposure, you won't need your ND filter. So you can leave that at home. You don't need to bother take that with you because it's dark out, of course. So you don't need to worry about that. So then all you need is the tripod, your cable release, your camera, and your lens, and you can do nighttime long exposure photography. Now, what can you accomplish doing nighttime long exposure photography? Well, if you're not already aware, let's say you set up along a road in your hometown area or along a major highway or something like that at night where you're off, safe off the road, out of the way of traffic, and you want to do a nighttime long exposure. If you point your camera at the road and then just open your shutter and hold it for 30, 45 seconds or 60 seconds while the traffic's going by, your final exposure will make it look like the vehicles are moving at warp factor, like in Star Trek. You'll get just a streak of lights and you won't actually be able to see the vehicles whatsoever. And it's a very beautiful effect. A lot of people really like it. As a matter of fact, I have, and it'll be in the slideshow, one of my shots that I took in a town called Between, Georgia in Monroe County at midnight along Highway 78. I set up my camera and I was doing a long exposure and a tractor trailer went by. They had some additional LED lights on the top of his trailer that were green in color. So I shot that and I got a beautiful image that I called the Wall of Light. And it's been highly popular. I've sold several thousand copies of that image on places like Getty Images, IM, 500px. I've sold some on there as well. But it can be a really cool effect because, like I said, basically it makes the vehicles look like they're moving at warp speed, and all you see is the trail of colored lights. You don't actually see the vehicle at all. So it's the effect that makes it look like the vehicle's moving at warp speed, super fast, because you can't see the vehicle. All you can see is the light trails from the vehicle as it goes by. Now, what are the settings that you're going to use for daytime and nighttime long exposure? Well, for those, it's going to stay pretty much the same. Now, for daytime, however, even with a neutral density filter, you can set your aperture to f8. That'll make everything in your shot in focus. That'll give you a good result. If you want to cut down the light power even more, in addition to your ND filter, you can maybe go to f11 or f16. That's completely up to you. I usually stick with f8 and let the ND filter do the rest of it. I just like the look I get at f8. I think it looks really nice. Everything is tack sharp and focus, and everything looks really great. Now, for the ISO, you want to set your ISO as low as possible, especially when you're doing daytime long exposure. So on most cameras, you can set it as low as 100, or if you're Nikon, it might be 200. It doesn't really matter. Just set it to the lowest one you can. Now, you can also check in your camera's menu and see if your camera is capable of expanded ISO ranges, because many of them are. And if you turn that functionality on with a camera that normally does ISO 100, you could probably get down to ISO 50, which you can on all the Canon cameras. And if your camera is one that goes down only as low as ISO 200 or 160 by default, the low end, when you turn on the expanded, could be ISO 80 or ISO 100. So half of what your normal base ISO is. And that's the ISO you want to use for both daytime and nighttime long exposure, because you don't want to introduce any additional noise into your images. That digital pixelation, the snow, you know, kind of like when in the old days when a TV lost signal and you just had that screen full of snow. You don't want that in your images. So as far as aperture and ISO, you're going to set them the same, whether it's daytime or nighttime. Go to your lowest ISO and use an aperture of f8 is what I recommend. If you want to go higher, you can. There's no written law on this. I'm just sharing the information with you because I've had a lot of new student photographers ask me how to do successful long exposure photographs. So that is pretty much it. So your shutter time is going to be bulb mode. So you're going to leave your shutter open for 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 20 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes, whatever you want to set it for. That's up to you, or however long you want to hold the button on your cable release in. That's going to be your exposure time. So you don't need to worry about that. All you need to worry about is setting your ISO and your aperture. Everything else you're going to do with that cable release, whether it's a physical one plugged into your camera, a wireless one mounted on top plugged into your camera, or using the camera manufacturer's app. Because the camera apps generally can tell what mode you're in, so they'll know you're in bulb mode, so it'll know. If you're using the app, you still got to press the shutter button, the digital shutter button on your phone, and hold it down and let it count, and whatever time you want to stop at, you stop. And then check your exposure, see how that final image looks. If it's too dark still, then you're going to want to go with a longer exposure time. If it's too bright for whatever reason, then you're going to want to go with a shorter exposure time. Now, one thing to keep in mind, as being that we're doing long exposure photography, it's going to take your camera longer than normal to save the image to the internal memory card. So don't turn your camera off rapidly. Wait until the little LED light turns off, signaling that it's done writing to the memory card, because you don't want to lose your data and potentially corrupt your memory card. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and share some of my daytime and nighttime long exposure images with you here in this video, so you can see the kind of effects, the kind of looks you can get doing both daytime and nighttime long exposure photography, and then I'll come back and wrap up this video. Okay, so as you saw in my slideshow, I've gotten some spectacular both daytime and nighttime long exposure images over the years that I've been doing photography. I really love doing it. It's a lot of fun. You can get some really cool effects, and you'll usually end up with images that'll just blow people's minds. Absolutely. They just turn out stunning and gorgeous, especially the nighttime stuff, but daytime as well, especially if you're doing a beautiful waterfall. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this video. My camera keeps overheating on me because it's kind of hot out here today, but I'll put a link down in the description below for a good tripod, a good ND filter, cable releases, all of that good stuff, so you can check them out for yourself. And I will see you all in the next video.